We looked at Thomas Moran in one of the museums as well, and we're going to talk about him here a bit. He originally was born in England, like Thomas Cole was, but both of them were raised in the United States. Moran had recently, before painting this image of the Juniata River, had gone back to England to look at landscape painting, and in particular he seems to have been very much interested in Turner's paintings, although you wouldn't know it from looking. He returns to Pennsylvania to try to apply what he'd learned. I think more important than Turner from his trip to England was the British art critic John Ruskin, who was writing about how important it was in the middle of the 19th century to study landscape on site and to draw it in great detail and accurately and closely, directly from nature. And that's, I think, what Moran is trying to communicate here are these ideas of Ruskin. So he shows us in western Pennsylvania the Juniata River flowing through cliffs that it is carved in the mountains toward the mouth of the Susquehanna, where it deltas out. Again, the theme of the power of nature and our insignificance relative to that. This river has, in fact, commanded these mountains. It's changed them, and here's a small bit of smoke from a small house nestled in the trees that we can't even see. Our presence is insignificant against the power of these western Pennsylvania mountains. Also, I think to drive the idea home of what Ruskin said, to draw accurately and closely from nature, we see the artist himself in the foreground, who is taking a break from his easel, where we see this very painting. His art supplies strewn around, to take a second, smoke a pipe, and think about what he's working on. Maybe even, I think he's looking, here's his palette and his paint bomb. He's just taking a second to look at nature. And you can see from this detail that the picture he's painting is the picture that we're looking at. He's actually doing it from nature, just as Ruskin had suggested. This idea of including yourself in the picture was not new to Thomas Moran, but probably came from Thomas Cole, who was the most famous landscape painter in America at the time. We didn't look at this picture. It's up in the Metropolitan Museum in New York. It shows a part of western Massachusetts where Mount Holyoke overlooks part of the Hudson River that makes this area called the Oxbow, which is based on that loop of the river here. And it shows a storm has just passed, done all this destruction in the foreground, again, the power of nature. But if you look closely just down in this area here, there we see Thomas Cole with his easel set up, looking over kind of his shoulder in a coy manner to look at us, as he has this dog's eye view well above any of the birds that are there over this deep and distant landscape. His umbrella here, his chair, all of these elements reappear in Moran's picture, who doesn't turn to look at us so obviously. But I think that shows not only his debt to Ruskin and the idea that one should study directly from nature, but also his debt to the greatest American landscape painter at the time, and really the founder of American landscape in many different ways, Thomas Cole. Well, in 1871, Moran was asked to illustrate a magazine article on a wondrous new region that the white settlers had recently discovered called Yellowstone. And so Moran boards a train westward, and this changes the course of his career. The very first place he got out of the train was in the new town of Green River, Wyoming, which sits at the base of these amazing cliffs. And this is where he made his very first sketch out west. Now, our painting dates 10 years later, but is based on those sketches that he had made in the very first place that he was struck by the majesty of the West. Here we see Green River, where the interstate now runs through it. It was, even in Moran's time, a boom town. A new bridge had been built across the river there, As such, town rose up at the base of the bridge and had become a sort of, small but vibrant town. None of this appears in Moran's images. What we see instead are the original settlers who had come there to begin with, still crossing the river by horse instead of on a bridge. Teepees in the background with campfires giving smokings to the setting sun. It's a really romanticized idea where any advance of civilization and any encroachment of industry has been totally erased by the artist, so that he focuses instead on the pristine nature of the landscape itself, and also on the drama of those cliffs. Even though the sun is setting in the background here, you'll notice how brightly lit they seem. They do, in fact, seem to glow very much. Maybe that's meant to be the moon, because we do have a bit of the sun touching these trees here as well as the sun sets. So certainly he's struck by the drama of this landscape. The idea that, here again, despite erosion, we have power of nature itself standing tall against the forces of time itself in a way that the works of man never will. Well, like I said, this set his career in 1871. He does make it to the Yellowstone to make those illustrations, and we looked at this one when we were at the museum, where we get the sense of how struck he was by the drama of the Yellowstone's own Grand Canyon, not to be confused with the famous one in Colorado. This is in Wyoming, and there's small figures here looking out over the grandeur of the West in this absolutely massive picture that details, again, drawn directly from nature, details the rocks, the trees, that shows his keen observation of this amazing scene. On the same trip, he also goes to the Grand Canyon in Colorado, and there we see here again a passing storm that has left everything wet, and you get the sense of, when we look at Thomas Cole and talked about the waters of the deluge subsiding, but here everything's been washed out, if you will. There's really nothing left but the power of nature itself as this storm has just passed through. And again, like Thomas Cole, we have the steam rising from the floors of the valley that give it a sort of primordial feeling, as if this was, God's original landscape. He goes back to the theme of the Yellowstone Grand Canyon 20 years later, when he paints this picture for the Centennial Exhibition in Chicago. In 1893, there's a World's Exhibition in Chicago where the Ferris wheel was first exhibited, and this was painted to be shown there. And again, makes it perhaps even more romantic. It's probably because it's a little bit more removed from observation. But he's backed away a little bit. We still have basically the same scene. But there's every chance that this one was based on this one. And he's removed elements and shifted them around a little bit, made that spire a bit taller, changed these ever so slightly for the composition, but maintained that idea of nature sort of pounding through the landscape, whether it's the waterfall itself or the storm clouds up above.